I'm so sorry. Did you just say that the costs rose from $2 million to $2 billion? That's a 1,000% increase. Hi, everyone. My name is Carson Binda, holding down the fort for our taxpayer army here in beautiful British Columbia. Now, I'm being joined by my good friend and colleague, Gage Halbrick, today to chat about Bill C-21 and the rising cost of Ottawa's gun buyback debacle. And it looks like this gun buyback debacle could potentially be reaching into the billions of dollars in cost for taxpayers across the country. But finally, it's looking like we can all breathe a sigh of relief after the latest updates from the government's gun control legislation. Gage, you're here to loop our supporters in on these changes, so why don't you tell us what's been going on?
I mean, you're right, Carson. We can breathe a small sigh of relief, and our supporters have a big part to play in that sigh. Recently, the government introduced late last year 2 amendments that could potentially ban thousands and thousands of single-shot regular types rifles. The SKS is a one that lots of farmers have, and they could include that in the gun ban, criminalizing thousands of hunters and sports shooters. But our supporters knew that was a costly and arbitrary program, so they let their MPs know, and they let the members of the committee know this was a bad idea, and they should scrap it. I mean, for example, the original cost of the buyback was somewhere around $756 million, as done by the PBO. And then a criminologist, after these latest amendments were introduced, said it could add another $1 billion to that cost, a crazy amount of money. And our supporters knew that, so they let the committee members know. And thankfully, a couple of weeks ago, they actually withdrew those 2 amendments, making saving taxpayers a lot of money. But it's important to remember the bill and the buyback aren't gone yet, but we did do a significant step in achieving that victory. I mean, for example, New Democrat MP Alistair McGregor, who's on the committee debating the bill, he said he's never seen such a groundswell of opposition that came from really everywhere all at once. And our supporters are a big part in that opposition.
Yeah, so it's great that these costs are down. It seems like everybody hated the amendments and the gun ban. Can you talk to us about who else was making this an issue? Who else was putting pressure on the Trudeau government to do away with this absolute boondoggle?
Well, it was almost everyone, and rightly so, because this is not any kind of sensible policy that any government should ever introduce. Like, for example, the National Police Federation, so the RCMP's union, came right off even before those amendments and said that the ban and buyback will, quote, do very little to address their goal to increase public safety, unquote. That's not a good start. But even outside of the professionals, we've got Carey Price, a goalie for the Montreal Canadiens, who posted a picture on Instagram of him in his hunting gear saying that he's not a criminal and that hunters should be able to keep their tools. And it kind of went on from there. The Assembly of First Nations passed an emergency resolution to oppose the amendments. And they said that it infringed on First Nations treaty rights to hunt and harvest. A big group of people impacted there. And to cap it all off, even members of Ottawa's own government thought this was a terrible idea. An MP for the Yukon, Brendan Hanley, said he would not be supporting the bill with the amendments. He said the government's gun control measures were upsetting. And he talked about how many Yukoners have a rich history of hunting and harvesting and what those bans would do to them up there. So, I mean, it's great that these amendments are gone, and it's great that everybody was fighting it. I mean, I'm personally happy that the federal government won't roll up to Saskatoon anytime to take away my SKS that I use for target practice.
So, it seems like we had everyone from the First Nations community to the RCMP to the government's own members of parliament telling us what a disastrously bad idea Bill C-21 and the gun buyback legislation was going to be. So it's great to see that the government's done away with these amendments that it sounds like everyone from coast to coast to coast had an issue with. But what does the getting rid of these amendments mean for the rest of the bill? I mean, the bill is still an issue. It's still around, isn't it?
It's still around. So it's good that those potential costs of a buyback, if they were included, is down. But we shouldn't get out the cake and streamers just yet, because before these last amendments, again, the buyback was estimated around $756 million. That's not a small chunk of change, and it's still around. The office that the government created to run The ban and buyback has already billed taxpayers for millions of dollars. And really, it's kind of, for history's any indication, we've been through this before. The original long gun registry, which didn't actually even have to do with purchasing firearms, was only supposed to cost $2 million. And by the end of that debacle, we had gotten to about $2 billion in cost to taxpayers.
I'm so sorry. Did you just say that the costs rose from $2 million to $2 billion? I mean, that's a 1,000% increase. That's insane. And quite frankly, it looks like this buyback is shaping up to be another boondoggle exactly like that long gun registry was. So Gage, for our supporters, for the folks at home, what are the next steps here? What can we do to keep on fighting against this legislation?
Well, because we want to be wary of those costs increasing again, potentially to even higher, we need to be wary, right? The bill isn't gone. They're still considering it in committee. So we need to make sure that we're watching out to make sure they don't introduce any of these types of amendments again that could drive costs up for taxpayers. But really, in the end, Ottawa just needs to scrap this whole thing, Bill C-21, and the original gun buyback. It's been nothing but a mess since they introduced it about 3 years ago. But luckily, Carson, our supporters are already on it. They're reminding their MPs and the committee members to get rid of this bill completely and scrap the gun ban and buyback.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gage, for really shining a light on what a disaster this has been for taxpayers since day one. Thank you for keeping the fight, keeping the pressure on the government to do away with this boondoggle. And I'm sure our supporters will be hearing a lot more from you moving forward as this developing story continues.
Thank you, Carson.